but your messages were completely misaligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
So Angela, before I do a bio, just welcome. So excited to have you here.
Thank you, Vicki. I am so excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It's always great to have conversations with you.
Oh, I know we always have too much fun. So we'll make sure we save a little time for our audience to ask questions, but I know the two of us and how we are, we get right into it. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Angela, let me take a moment just to introduce you. Angela is an award-winning entrepreneur with expertise in public speaking, corporate training, sales, and business consulting. She is the founder of a company called Kinesics, and that's a consulting firm that helps businesses actually achieve their full potential by mastering the art of body language and nonverbal communications. And Angela and I have, we've had lots of conversations and just love my time with her because I learned so much about body language, and she's taught me a lot of things about my hands, which we're going to share a lot of those experiences with you today. But, the other thing that people don't know about you, and I think it's really important, is the resilience that you have and the curiosity that you have about life. You've lived in 2 countries now, which is incredible. And well, 3 actually, counting your home country, but also the fact that you were a incredible competitive dancer when you were younger. And so I wanted to share that because I think that was a great aha. Maybe we'll have a quiz later to see who picked that up. So Angela, again, I want to welcome you and thrilled that you're here with us today.
Thank you. You are giving away all my secrets.
Oh, I am. I want everybody to know about you because I think you're awesome. So we want to make sure our audience knows. So let's just jump right in because I know we got lots of people excited to learn about, nonverbal cues, body language. But I want to start with, what made you decide to actually make this your passion and your profession? So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the story is not as black and white. It's not I wake up one morning or I dream about being a consultant or a speaker. It just happened as life progresses. And I believe sometimes life puts you on that path. And in the end, you end up in this place you never expected, but it makes sense so much if you would look at your life and the trajectory. So as you said, I have been dancing, a competitor dancer since I can remember myself, probably 5 years old or something like that. I had the dancers in my family as well. And I actually had teachers. Most of my family are teachers in trade. So kind of that was always natural part of me. And with that movement being always part of my life, as you mentioned, immigrating through different cultures, different countries, when you actually don't know the language, most of the time when I arrived to a new country, I didn't really know how to speak the language. So subconsciously, you rely on reading cues and you rely about how can you use your body to say something. And as that kind of go through my life, the immigration, the different cultures, being in movement before, because I was dancing for a long time, I arrived at a point of my life in my I would say in my late 20s, beginning of my 30s, where I said, okay, what am I doing next? I need to change my life. I'm always curious about growth. I got to the point that I want to do something else. And I did a 360. At that time, I didn't even know it's called a 360. I just invented a questionnaire that I distribute through my friends and people that I work with, and which some of them thought it was like, why am I doing this questionnaire for you? Because it was not as common at that time. And when I did that questionnaire, one of the people said, you're really good at reading people. And I'm like, what does that mean? And she's a neuroscientist. And we always had those, similar to yourself, Vicki, we always had those deep conversations. What does that mean? Let's go dissect life. And that's where it started. And so from there, what I was reading movement. That's what I did when I didn't know the language and I was immigrating. And because I had the movement background, it kind of fell into place that all of those things connected. And I'm always passionate about business. So when I studied nonverbal communication, and I realized it's very much science-based, there's a lot of studies about that. It's not a woo-woo topic, like a lot of people believe it is. I applied it to business because that's what my passion lies, is in business. Some other experts in behavior analysts like myself, they applied in politics and police, but I wanted to bring it to business because I think there's a lot of benefits for it.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Well, and I love what you just said there, Angela, about, and this is so fascinating, like when we're looking at even career shifts, right? Career changes, how, because you studied movement, even and motion, even in your dance, and how that now, between that and the moves you've made to these different countries, has helped you to integrate yourself into, this beautiful career of nonverbal communication and body language, and really understanding sometimes what's not being said. So why is this so important with, when we think about nonverbal and body language, why is it so important for how we represent ourselves?
It's extremely important because nonverbal communication is not studied in schools. And similar to, I always refer this, similar to the financial literacy. We don't study it in school, but when we go to life, it's really important. The same thing in communication. We only study the written communication. We only study the words in the communication. We're not actually really learning how to communicate, how to understand another, how you communicate. And that's really important when you go to workforce, when you go to interact, when you get married, when you have kids. Communication is the same thing as financials. It's a must know for you to have a fulfilled life. And when we're talking about nonverbal communication, I'm just taking your question to another direction, but when we're talking about nonverbal communication, we have to understand that everything is driven through our emotions.
Yes.
What is communication is emotions that we are bringing to the table, and we may be communicating it, maybe not, maybe communicated efficiently, maybe not, but everything starts with emotions, and everything you're feeling will show up in your nonverbal communication. And what's a nonverbal communication? It's you have your body, you have your face, you have your tone, and then you have verbal content, verbal style that are a little bit less of the nonverbal communication. So when you're communicating, all of those messages coming across consciously or subconsciously, and as well, you're receiving those messages all the time from others, consciously or subconsciously, and you are wired. As you're wired to understand your baby's movements and what they want. If they want to eat, if they squint a certain way, you know how they feel. We're wired to understand those behaviors, and some of them, those emotions are universal. Fear, happiness, sadness, and we don't study them. So to answer your questions, there's so much to learn about communication, and we only study such a small percentage of it.
Yeah, so true. And so many times, because we're not in tune to that, we misinterpret things, right? Either way, right? Because the impact can be translated completely different to how it was actually meant. I know one of the things that you worked on with me was pointing. Remember that? Because you were like, Vicki, don't point. It's not a good thing to be pointing. And I was like, what are you talking about? So maybe just take a second and maybe give a couple of examples of, and we can start with that one. Like, why would pointing, what does that do to the recipient?
So if we look at what are gestures, okay? Gestures, ideally, what they do is that they emphasize what you are saying, okay? Now, if we're talking about pointing the finger, it's very authoritative, right? And so if you are not saying no to somebody, like bad person, bad boy, bad, sit for a puppy. That's not what you're trying to say. That's not what you mean. But that's the message you are showing with your nonverbal cues, right? So you, Vicki, specifically, a very open person. You welcome people. You are never trying to be authoritative. Being open hand, open gesture, showing I'm open, coming with open hands, I want to talk to you openly, is who you are. So if you point, it's just not in alignment with actually the message you're trying to do. And if you think about visuals, if you think about politicians that point, right, how do you feel about that? If you think about Hitler, he has the palm down, which is also very dominant, versus palm up is showing open hands, open gestures. I'm coming with no weapons. I'm showing you my cards right here. And that's what you are trying to communicate. And that's who you are, with your authentic self. It's very important to be authentic self, but your messages were completely misaligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And so I'll take it another place. But
okay.
What you want to understand, the basic of everything, I'm back to it, it's emotions. The basics of everything is emotions. And emotions are there for us to act without thinking. For example, if the car comes and you need to turn around, it's to act without thinking. But if we are not learning to understand emotions, and we, for example, lose our head, right? And we only realize it after, that's a kindergarten level, right? And then after that, if you're able to learn about your emotions and understand and bring awareness to your emotions, and then not just bring awareness when it's too late, but bring awareness at that time, you can then learn to slowly manage it, which is becoming a high school level. But the ideal is when you learn to identify those emotions ahead of time, which is when a trigger happened and how you're going to react. That's the university level that we all want to be in. And that's where nonverbal communication is applied. Why? Because everything you're feeling shows up on your nonverbal communication. So you may think there's a thinking and there's a feeling, okay? If you're thinking, you're one thing and you're managing your emotions, but what you're feeling is totally different. It will show up in your nonverbal communication. There will be incongruencies. The ideal is that you want to bring, number one, want to bring awareness and learn about your emotions, about your states, how does it work, and then align it with your thinking. That's the ideal state, is when you're thinking and you're feeling working in harmony together and saying the same message. Because if you suppress your feelings, they will show up. So you cannot suppress, you need to learn how to communicate what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And I'll just going to add, and I know I'm a little bit on the ramble here, but
no, that's okay. That's really great content, because what you're saying is, instead of reacting, you're responding. So you're really being conscious of how you're presenting yourself. And if it's not in alignment, then your body language will actually show that you're not in alignment. That's beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I work with corporate, often being asked, well, how do I do how do I start with that? Well, the way you start is when you have an interaction with somebody and you have something to say or something happened, you want to react in the way that you say, I'm thinking this way and I'm feeling this way. So often, even with you, when I'm speaking, sometimes when we doing podcasts, but when a casual call, sometimes when we say, okay, can we do this together? I would tell you, Vicki, this is what I'm thinking and this is what I'm feeling. And sometimes
Yes.
it will be in alignment and sometimes it will be off alignment. And if it's an off alignment, this is where you have to take a look into it and say, okay, why is it off alignment? Because ideally, what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling should be the same. So if you're going to your boss and you want to tell them about something, for example, even promotion, right? You can come to your boss and say, I feel this way about this promotion and this is what I think. And that's really important to be able to identify your thinking and feeling and communicate that to the point that it's maybe natural for you. You don't need to say I'm thinking and I'm feeling, but it's ideally you do that as much as possible.
Yeah, it becomes your discipline, right? It becomes your natural tendencies that you bring the two together, but not to actually verbalize it. You don't always have to. So I love what you're sharing there, Angela. And so something I think might be very helpful for the audience is to understand what some of those, I guess, most common nonverbal cues are that actually do sabotage our message. So I brought up the pointing a minute ago because that was one that I was unconscious of. I didn't even realize I was doing it until you shared it with me. And now I'm super conscious of my hands being open. So maybe you can share, right? Like share a couple of things that you see on a regular basis, especially at work, like things that get us in trouble or not necessarily in trouble, but it just doesn't help us convey that message very well.
Ideally, Vicki, I don't make people subconscious, but more conscious and not uncomfortable with their hands movement. But bringing to that awareness, you have to do that adjustment, right? Like at one point,
Absolutely.
you have to be like, okay, I'm conscious and I need to be comfortable with it. But that's years of practice that you had other behavior and you have to switch it. It doesn't always happen overnight. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it takes a practice of a year or two if you had 30 or 20 years of another practice. But for your question, what sabotages our communication and nonverbal, one of the things that people are not thoughtful or are not aware or don't think about it is that what are the messages that other people perceive me? Because so nonverbal communication in my methodology and what I did, I broke it down into 3 levels. And one is understanding yourself. What is happening within you? Are you congruent? Like we talked about the feelings, the understanding of self, your triggers, what's happening there, your own self-congruence. The second level is understanding self to other, the messages you are giving to others. And only then after that, I teach people how to read others. Because if you don't understand how to understand yourself first, you may be contaminating that reading or you bringing your own biases and your own emotions that you're not even aware of what's going on. So you have to understand yourself first. And so if we understand the emotions that we talked about that, the second level where people sabotage is messages that they're giving to others. They're often very focused about how to read others that they forget to take a look at themselves and say, okay, what are the messages I'm giving? So the simple thing is crossed hands, okay? Crossed hands does not mean reserved. It does not. So I come from a Israeli background, warm weather. I'm always cold in Canada. This is a natural state for me. So my hands tend to cross. Crossing hands can be also a self-hug. Crossing hands, I work with a lot of technology people. They cross their hands where they have to self-reflect and they kind of cross their hands, lean back, and then I know, okay, they're actually thinking about my content. They're not trying to actually disengage. So cross hands does not mean reserve. But when we're looking into what are others understand from us, if most people are understanding, pointing, crossing their hands, lack of eye contact, or specifically in a specific culture, right, with North American culture, as X, Y, Z. If their understanding of cross arms, meaning you're closed down, you got reserved, then you have to self-reflect on yourself and say, okay, I should be aware of it and I should not do that because that's not what I want to communicate. Same thing with the pointing of the hand. Same thing with the lack of eye contact. So that's where the biggest sabotage happens, is where we don't look at ourselves and say, okay, this is not, yes, I am cold. That's why I'm crossing my hands, but that's not how others people perceive crossing the hands. Therefore, I either not going to cross my hands, or I set the truth free. And I would say, okay, you know what, I'm a little bit chilly. I'm going to cross my hands. You know, I'm still listening with you here, but I'm just cold. So you kind of say that to put the other person at ease, because they are trying to read messages consciously or subconsciously from you.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's ensuring that the person understands what the intent is, instead of them assuming that it means they're bored, they're disengaged, or whatever. What about this? Like, I know we've talked about where the hand up on the neck, like maybe talk about that for a second, because I know that one you always say to me, Vicki, don't put your hand up on your neck.
Yeah. And before that, I just want to comment on what you said a second ago, is that I don't have the specific word you used, but you said something that you have to clarify, right? What your intent is.
Yes.
And it's very interesting because you do that verbally, right? When you have communications with people verbally, you're trying to clarify your intent.
Yes. But
you don't do it non-verbally. You're not conscious of what you're doing non-verbally, and you're not clarifying your intent there. And back to what we said before, your verbal and non-verbal have to match. Your thinking and feeling has to match. Now, for the hands on the neck and playing with the hair, well, this is a very female trait. Okay, hair playing, for an example, when people use their hair, and it's showing, if we go back in time, it's showing to the male that my hair is healthy, I'm fertile. Okay, check out my hair. If you go to a bar or where you have male and female, and you watch them, when a cute guy comes in, women flip their hair. And there's the competition that happens of it, who flips their hair. Sometimes they will take the elastic down and put it back on. That's all an indication of like, my hair is healthy. You know, I'm a healthy woman. I can help bear a healthy child. Now you have to take that now into business and understand, okay, in business, you don't want to do that too much, because that's not the message you're trying to give there. Okay. It's the same thing as you're not going to flirt in the corporate world or in business. But if you're playing with your hair and twisting your hair while you're looking at the guy with a tilted head, you're actually flirting a lot more than you would be doing it verbally. So that's for the hair. For the neck is what happens with the neck is that, think about vampires movies, when they go to the neck to attack you, okay? The vessels in the neck is the place where if we get bitten, we just die fast. That's what it is. It's the most gentle, the most sensitive, the most vulnerable place in our body. And so when we feel not secure, we go towards the neck to protect ourselves. Women tend to do that more because, especially in the corporate world, because it's a new transition for them relatively. It's a new place. They're not as familiar. They're trying hard. There's, we can talk about diversity and inclusion forever, but this gesture is male and female, but females in the business world, in the corporate world, tend to do it more often because that's how they feel. So when a person feels attacked, or a person feels unsafe, that can be their own perception. It doesn't have to be necessarily they actually attacked. They will tend to hold their neck to feel more safe.
Okay. So you brought up something there, I think that's really important, is, there are some specific traits or some specific nonverbal cues that are more apparent in women. So what might be some other things that we do that are common with our body language that can downplay our messages, really?
Well, if we're looking at male and female body language, if we just take that topic, which is a very interesting topic and not scientifically yet researched enough. There's very little science into it. But if we just look at evolution, okay, if we just look at evolution, and we look at that and we'll look at how males act in evolution and they're nonverbals, and we look at females. So in males, you go, okay, they have to take space because this is their territory. They have to be able to hunt. They be able to go out and do things. They really early on started with business, so they learned that language and sitting wide because they're used to hunt, and you need to take territories. And if another man comes into your territories, what you do, you take space. It's called peacocking, and you do that in dating as well, when a man spread their arms, and that comes from evolution. And you see that they brought their evolution, which is totally okay, it's totally fine. They brought their evolution to the business world, right? Which is great. But then women have very different nonverbal. They had to stay more small because they had to take care of the cubs, not to be seen too much in the evolution because they don't want to be eaten, right? They not necessarily go and hunt and take space. And then when they go into business later on, okay, then they bringing those traits with them. And so then we're sitting at the table and we have the men that spread their feet, speak up, and have that experience because that's their evolution, and they started business ahead of the women. That's what we see. And then we see the woman does the things from her evolution that does not necessarily work in that space, like hiding, putting her head down, not creating eye contact, not taking space, all of those things. And I'm not saying, just to clarify, I'm not saying that women have to become men and men have to, kind of be what they are. There's a dance here that both genders have to understand that they brought their own evolution. It's like a bag. They brought their own evolution with them, and they both have to adjust. So if the man sees a woman looking down and not taking space, he should understand, okay, he needs to either express it to her or ask her opinion, what she thinks. But at the same time, a woman should understand also that now she's not in the same setting as she was before. And she should also adjust to today's day as we adjust in many other ways. So we should be adjusting in nonverbal as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, one of the things, and I think you and I have talked about this, but for our audience's purposes, one of the things I've been working on is that whole feminine, masculine energy that because there is a play, right? And it's not male, female, it is the feminine and the masculine, and harmonizing that is so important. And I'm so glad you brought that one up, because it is both nonverbal and in verbal how we communicate. So thank you. That's great. So what do we do to improve that awareness of our own nonverbal communication?
First, you want to be aware of your emotion. That's the first place to start, is understanding your own emotions. That's the spark of life. Emotions trigger us to eat. Emotions trigger us to have sex. Emotions trigger us to pursue our dream, our loved one, our kid. Emotions drive everything, and emotions drive our communication. So that's the first place where somebody should look into, and understanding themselves and understanding their emotion. The second place to look for is looking and reflecting as you're in a meeting, as you're sitting with your friends. Take a look where your feet are, where your hands are, how are you feeling and how are you thinking? Is you thinking and feeling aligned? And that can be, maybe some people are not as aware about their feelings, right? So then they say, okay, For example, for jobs interview, somebody would say, you know what, I think I'm very confident and all of that. But then I urge them to take a look at their body, and their body is contracted and your body is shrinked, and they're sitting, I'm exaggerating a little bit, and they're sitting slouched. Then if I ask them, how are you feeling? And we go deeper into the feeling, they will realize that actually they're not feeling confident. Your body will also tell you, you can use your body to communicate, but you also can use your body to learn how you're feeling, because everything you're feeling will be on your body. So therefore, if you're not sure how you're feeling, check what's happening in your muscles. Are your muscles contracted? Are your muscles expanded? Are you feeling tight? Are your feet are crossed? Are your hands are crossed? So the second place I would urge people is to look and understand if their thinking and feeling is the same, and how does it manifest itself in their bodies.
Yeah, that's great. That's really awesome. And one thing you brought up there, I think is really important is, are your feet crossed? How are you sitting? And especially when we get into things like negotiations, right? Like being not hyper aware, but yes, being hyper aware of, because you're giving signals, right? And so maybe talk about that for a second, because we negotiate all the time, whether it's, for positioning, jobs, increases, vacation time, whatever. We're always negotiating in everything that we do with our families, with our kids, put the dishes in the dishwasher, we're negotiating. So can you talk a little bit about that and how we can show up as our best self?
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's an interesting topic, and I think we're not at 5 hours to discuss it fully.
Well, we'll have to have you on again to get more into it.
Let me try to simplify it. First, you have to understand what kind of negotiation you're coming into. Okay, so are you negotiating something like with your kids, putting the dishwasher, or are you negotiating of a selling of a business, and you're negotiating a high stake environment, or you're negotiating an investigation of a criminal, which is that also is a negotiation, right? You have to first identify, okay, what negotiation am I coming into? Because depending on what negotiation it is, you also need to bring your different self. Some negotiations, you're fully your authentic self. But then if we're looking into investigations, I cannot bring my open, authentic self, because that's not how necessarily that works. I have to take away myself out and then be present and very pragmatic and strategies and all of that. And then look at the environment, look at the content. You have to understand what negotiation you're walking into, and then according to that, understand what work you need to do prior to that. So probably, asking your daughter to put the dishes away, you don't need a massive strategy for, right? While
depends
again,
on the kid. Just kidding. Sorry, Angela.
But maybe you do. But in investigation or really high stake environments, governments negotiation, it's a very different type of negotiation. You bring a different toolkit with you, right? I think about plumbing, right? Do you need like a screwdriver, or you need a whole bag of different tools? The best negotiations in general, if we talk, if we're not going extremes, and we're talking about general negotiation, salary negotiation, spouse communication negotiation, kid negotiation, you want to be always your authentic self. Okay, this is the most important thing. You have to be true to yourself, hence understanding yourself, your emotions. And then from there, you have to look at what is it you're trying to achieve, and then how is that you can communicate that, and where is the best place to communicate that. So negotiations is complex, and reading people is complex, because you have to look at their baseline. You have to understand your own baseline. You have to understand into environments. What environments are you going to have this conversation in? Okay. Is it an environment where you want them to remember what happened? So if something happened in the coffee shop and you want to talk about it and you want them to remember that episode, you want to relieve that, recall that episode, you may want to take them to that coffee shop, right? So then their environment, you also want to understand your biases that you bring, the cultural beliefs. You want to understand their biases and cultural beliefs. So when you're in a negotiation, in general, I will suggest do your homework of understanding what's going on with you and then what's going on with the other person, and then try to communicate it from the authentic place that is understanding the other person's beliefs, biases, and all the things that they bring to the table consciously or subconsciously.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sometimes that's hard to do though, depending on the type of negotiation, right? Because it really does go back to what you said in the beginning. It's the emotional aspect of how you're showing up, right? Because if there's a lot of emotion involved in it, it could be high stakes. It could be, you need that, or you really want that job promotion or that salary increase, or it could be navigating a divorce. Like there's a lot of emotion that takes place in those things. And so it's, how to stabilize yourself, but also what's the body language cues that will be more supportive than detracting from the conversation.
So what's you trying to do? Are you, again, depending on the stake of that environment. So an example in the fidgeting, okay, fidgeting, playing with things or rubbing things. Sometimes people rub things on their legs. This is a soothing mechanism, okay? Now, if you are going into a divorce, for example, we just take divorce. If you're going to a divorce and it's a genuine communication, it's a genuine relationship that it's open and you may separate, but you're still in really, really good terms. You may don't care to hide that you're fidget. You may don't care. You may just put it, this is your authentic self. You're nervous. It's a big stake. You putting your heart there. It's okay. It's totally fine. But then if you are, in a different situation where it's not going well, or you're in, negotiating a much bigger deal, business deal, showing that you're nervous and showing that you are fidgeting may show the other person that you're nervous, where they will take away from the deal you're trying to do. So you may want to come in. For example, when I deal with negotiations like that, then I relatively look younger than my age. I'm short, or short-ish to the general, and I'm a female, and all of those things. Sometimes when there's a big guy and in a suit and years of experience, for me maybe it's not an advantage, right? And if I start fidgeting and all of that, they already see me at a disadvantage. So then I'll come in with a strategy. I'll take space. I will look in the eye. I will communicate very strongly. My voice, even now, it's changed.
Yes, it did.
I will shake hands very differently than if I would shake hands with you, Vicki, or somebody else. You have to have those strategies, and according to what the situation, again, it's always assessing the situation.
Yeah.
It's very important to decide what to do and what not to do. Ideally, you're always steering towards your authentic self, who you are, your true self, understanding yourself, your boundaries, your needs, your desires, and you always communicate. Ideally, you steer as much, but if you're dealing with intense negotiations, or interviews of, I'm talking police interviews, then it's a different game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think that's helpful, because knowing thyself is very important. Absolutely. But it's also, it's being able to mentally prepare yourself. So all physical aspects of your body are prepared for that discussion, regardless. And it's not being hard. It's not being rigid. It's more about, Can you be expansive? Can you hear what the other person is saying? And are you showing that you're interested in hearing? Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm just looking at our time because I want to make sure we get some audience questions. But given your experience, what sage advice would you like to share with our audience? Maybe 2 or 3 tips they can take with them of things they can start implementing right now when it comes to body language.
Oh, Vicki.
I know, it's a big one.
You're giving me 2. And 2 in 2 minutes. I would say number 1, you want to show openness. So open your hands, open your palms, show your hands, especially on video calls. You don't want to show just your face. Video calls, it's all about data. So the more data you're showing, I'm trying to show my hands, I'm showing my face. The more data you give, the better it is. So video calls or non-video calls, try to give open data and open information.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Go ahead, continue, Angela.
Try to give open data and open information. Now, for the second thing is I would urge for people after they leave today and when they're interacting with others, ask what are they feeling and then ask what they're thinking. And just do that exercise with yourself during the week. Sometimes stop and say, okay, how am I thinking and how am I feeling about this situation or about now? And then check, and I'll be even curious to see, let me know, write to me at Angela Podolsky, or you can message Vicki and tell me if you detected some stuff that you didn't think they were there.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's excellent. And maybe in the chat, Angela, you can also put your website of how people can reach you, because I want to make sure that, there may be other questions that come up, and we can certainly keep the conversation going. As you said earlier, we could talk for hours about every specific piece of this conversation. So we'll have to have you back on the podcast again, and maybe just dive into a couple of those things. But I would like to open it up to the audience. So if you ladies and gentlemen would like to turn your video on, and you can either put it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that, but we would love to have you interacting and asking, any questions that you have regarding what you've learned here today. Who's brave to speak up? Awesome. So who would like to ask a question?
I would be happy to.
Okay, great, Wendy. Thank you.
So I'm just curious, once I align my thinking and my my behaviors, like my thinking and my feeling, what's next? So sometimes obviously I could recognize that I'm communicating the wrong thing. Sometimes I don't want to necessarily show that card.
Well, I would question, what is it that you're not wanting to show that card? What ideally, you always want to communicate what you're thinking and what you're feeling. So if an example, somebody told you to work on a project, you can say, I think it's a great project, but I feel it's not always aligned with my morals. Having said that, I will still work on it, but it's not my ideal project. So you communicated a positive and negative, and you communicate, it's like a math, plus, minus, or a plus, and the outcome, right? So I would say you should always, it's up to the person, but I believe that you should always communicate your thinking and your feeling, because there are 2 states you can be in: expressive or suppressive. And you never want to be in a state of suppressive. Doesn't matter if it's anger, which is considered a negative emotion. You should not suppress that either, because only when you're angry, you can find solutions. If you would not be angry about women's rights, we would not be here. If you would not be angry about other, you would not be here. So therefore, you should never suppress. You should properly communicate, which brings us to the beginning. If you're kindergarten, high school, or university, you want to detect your triggers and that you get starting to feel that ahead of time, not when you lost your head and after that. But it's very important to identify those emotions and communicate them and let them live. It doesn't matter if you end up, you can be angry that you have to do the laundry again, okay? But you can still do that. You can tell your husband, I'm so frustrated that I have to do the laundry again, and I'm not enjoying that. So let's try to figure out a solution. But you still communicate that. You still let it out. So you're trying to find a solution to that. I hope that answered your question.
That's great advice.
Yeah. Well, and also I think what you're sharing there, it's the transparency, right? And so the issue that happens is when you don't communicate what the thinking and the feelings are, is we get into this place of resentment, right? And that starts to build because we've held back what we should be sharing, right? And there's a way, like to Angela's point, there's a way of doing that, because you can communicate tough conversations in a way that can turn into opportunities.
Yes, but let's call this okay. Let me be really blunt with you. It's my favorite place. Okay, let's call the bullshit, okay? Because reality is, when you're trying to suppress, you're just fooling yourself.
Yeah.
You're only fooling yourself because everybody else can see through your nonverbal, maybe not immediately, but it will come out. It will come out through your nonverbals, and the other person will see it, or it will come out manifest in other ways, and maybe you're not feeling good, and depression depends on what is that you're suppressing. You're only fooling yourself, because suppression of emotion will always manifest and will always come out somehow. And the first thing, it will be through your nonverbal, and people will see it. So it's a little bit of a, I'm kind of trying to bullshit myself type of situation.
Well, it's a dance. You're doing a little dance there. And so it is getting it out. So great question, Wendy. Thank you. So what other questions do we have? Come on, we've got some brave people on here. Annie, yes, way to go.
And my question had to do with, I get a lot of speaking interactions that are like this virtually. So what would be a key thing to keep in mind when we are actually interacting like this? And a lot of the body language is lost. And I'm a very kinetic person, and I definitely feel the restraint of being in a chair and not being able to move too much. What would be some recommendations to optimize that overall, better communication using body language, et cetera, through this virtual language, or medium, I should say?
Yeah. So one thing you're doing great is you're showing your hands. You are showing data. The thing is, people say there's no nonverbal communication through Zoom or other platforms. Actually, I disagree. There are some things that we're missing. We don't see the feet, we don't see the center the same way, but there's a lot of other things that opened up to us. It's the first time in ever where people bring you to your own habitat. From your first interaction, they're bringing you to their own space, which usually before it takes you, coffee and this, breaking the comfort zone, all of those things, till they get comfortable to invite you to a barbecue or something else to their house, where now they're right away inviting you to their house. So you have a lot more data about that person than ever before. So you have somebody here on the call, they have their bienvenue, they have their beliefs, or I don't know why I went to French, but
okay.
Maybe that being in Quebec affects, but they have their belief sign, and then you can okay, let's talk about that. What does that mean to you? Will right away take you to get to know the person a lot better and a lot more authentically and a lot deeper than ever before. So I would say one is give data. So what is that you're putting when you have your phone calls or your Zoom calls? What are you putting around you? Okay. What is the behind that you're giving information to the other people that they connect with you and relate with you and have a conversation with you? That it is, is different and more personal. Two is you want to make sure that your camera is a bit up like a rib cage level. So then you can show more hands, more gestures. I would say that's the gist of it. Give data as much as possible to the people you're speaking with, and then your interactions will be so much fun and it's a lot more deeper than they ever were in a coffee shop.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great, Angela. And great question, Annie. I would just to add to that, I think also when you're on Zoom or these types of platforms, it amplifies your listening skills, right? So we really are much more in tune to what's being said because there's so much going on around us, even though you're in your home or you're in a different space. So there's a lot of ways I think that all communication pieces are being amplified.
Yeah, I have to add one more thing. There's about a cognitive load. Like cognitive load may happen if you have calls after calls. You need to get up, move away, and come back. Otherwise, we don't change environments anymore the same way. Therefore, you should just go and get a glass of water, walk around the table and then come back. That way it's hard to stay focused for a long period of time. And to what Vicki said, you are more focused, but it's not natural for us to stay that focused for a long time. So you need to, in between like 2 minutes, get up, have a glass of water. It's good to you too, to drink a lot of water.
Exactly. Hydration. So any other questions before we wrap up here today? Stasha, yes, please.
Angela, thank you for all the amazing tips. I had a question for you. Going into my future interview modes, how do you control your voice? What are the best tips you have? Because I can be very loud being European. So I just want to make sure that the other person perceives me the right way.
Well, it's very interesting how you ask your question. I am European, I'm very loud, but I want the person to perceive me the right way, which you are really loud. So I think that the question really is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that am I being too loud may affect my job interviews, and am I being authentic or not authentic, and how do I address that?
True.
So when we look into that, look, I'm a European, and as you hear, my voice is, this is the low bar of my voice. So there are advantages of it in leadership and other stuff. So what I would do is that when you have an interview, you can scale up and scale down on your voice. And you do that with your pets, you do it with your family member. You can be a bit more softer. I'm sure you know how to do that over the years. But I would also suggest to set the truth free and say, hey, my voice is a strong voice. I always had that strong voice. And I just want to put it out there. So when the right time comes, I would just may even say, when I get really excited, my voice becomes even stronger. And it sounds like I'm screaming, but I'm not. I'm just super, super excited. And by saying that, you're setting the truth free and you're staying authentic to yourself. And that's the goal. I don't want you to get a job where you change your voice and then you get the job and then you show up completely differently. Your voice is your part of a skill that a lot of women are actually lacking by not having a strong voice where they're not heard. But you having that strong voice actually gives you a lot of advantages. So I would look at the advantages that you bring to the table and just call it, say, hey, listen, I have a strong voice, and the more excited I get, the more stronger my voice becomes.
That's awesome. Yes, that passion is like screaming. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, ladies, we
Thank
are at
you.
the top of the hour, and great question, Stasha. Great question. We're getting right up to the top of the hour, and if there's any other questions, please feel free. You can reach out to Angela directly, or you can reach out to me, and I'll funnel questions to Angela. It's been such a great privilege just having you here, Angela. So thank you so much. You gave some great feedback. It was awesome. And I know everybody has to head off, but I do want to remind you that our next session is June 24th. We will have Kelly Thompson here with us discussing the imposter monster, which is another great topic. And hopefully you can join us. So it's June 24th from 12 to 1. So Angela, thank you again. I am, as always, very grateful to you and love having these conversations. And we may have to seriously have you back on again. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you, Angela.